Welcome to this special episode of the Federal's Worldly Wise, a weekly video program that attempts to deconstruct trending issues of international importance. Today we have with us Mohan Katarki, an expert in river water disputes, to help understand the contours of the Indus Water Treaty that enables sharing of river waters between India and Pakistan. Under Operation Sindoor, the Indian government has suspended the treaty and giving rise to a whole lot of questions about what it means for the future and where the treaty stands. Mohan Katarki is a designated senior advocate of the Supreme Court and an expert in transboundary water laws. He has appeared in several complex interstate river water disputes for over 4 decades, defending various states. He has written extensively on the subject, both at national and the international level. So, Mr. Katarki, welcome to the Worldly Wise.
Thank you, Dakshin Murthy. Yeah.
Briefly, what is the Indus Water Treaty?
Indus Basin is the watershed or a catchment which technically rises in the Tibet part of China. Then it encompasses India and Pakistan. One of the tributary, Kabul, rises in Afghanistan. So if you exclude the China and the Kabul part of Afghanistan, you can say 90% of the basin or a catchment or a watershed, whatever you call it, falls in India and Pakistan. Now, in this catchment, there are 6 rivers. 3 rivers are called western rivers. These are main river Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab. They are all clubbed together as western rivers. Then there are 3 eastern rivers, Sutlej, Ravi, and Bass. The Indus Treaty was entered in 1960. Before that is before 1947, the Indus Basin was not really an international basin, except that little part was in China and little part was in Afghanistan. It was a interstate or a federal basin to large extent. The disputes arose in those days also between the Sindh and the Punjab when British government decided to construct Sutlej Valley project to irrigate the dry areas in the erstwhile Punjab, which lies part in India, part in Pakistan now, including Haryana. The objections were raised by Sindh, which is a basin state and particularly a delta state, where a large amount of water below Sakkur Barrage was consumed for cultivation of rice crop by age-old inundation method. As a result of the objection, because Sindh had substantial interest, and that always happens in case of a delta state, the British government appointed Anderson Committee to reconcile the differences between the upstream state and the downstream state. It didn't succeed. They appointed a commission headed by legendary Sir Benegal Rao in 1942 to resolve the dispute in a judicial manner by taking evidence and by applying the law. The committee submitted its report. It's really a classic, one of the well-written report on interstate water disputes, or even in the international law, it is respected very well. But unfortunately, the committee recommendations or decision, whatever you call, could not be implemented because the partitions overtook in 1947. So as soon as the partition overtook, what was considered as already a contested basin between the upstream and downstream state in the British India became much more complicated as a basin between the 2 rival countries, India and Pakistan. Immediately, there were problems with regard to the Firozpur barrage, that whether Pakistan will suffer or whether some part of the Bikaner territory in India will suffer. But they're all resolved in 1948. But that laid to the foundation for bit of bitterness between the countries. Subsequently, very talented people were involved in the negotiation between India and Pakistan, including the then chairman of the Tennessee Valley Authority, the World Bank chairman. Then on Indian side, we had a very talented engineer called Gulati, and there was a German legal expert. Overall, the former Prime Minister himself took a personal interest because it became necessary for India to strike a deal with Pakistan since the World Bank made it a condition that they would be able to fund Bakaranangal project only if the agreement is arrived between the two nations on the sharing of water. So the agreement was basically an agreement which India was very keen to arrive at and strike a deal to present it to the World Bank. And World Bank did play a very good role as a mediator. So that's when in 1960, an agreement was arrived at sharing the water between India and Pakistan. And what did they share? The sharing was India wanted a full control over the three rivers, Ravi, Bass, and Satluj, though it doesn't yield that much of water, yields about roughly 35 million acre feet MAF. And India got full control over these three rivers known as eastern rivers. The other three rivers, western rivers, Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, in which India had little interest, were given to Pakistan. In a sense, restriction was put on India not to cut the flows, which flows by gravity, except for limited purpose of using for irrigation to an extent of 3.6 MAF approximately. Then for constructing some hydropower projects which does not involve consumptive utilization of water. So subject to these riders, a free flow to Pakistan was guaranteed, and that was a large amount, something about 100 MAF of water, which is generated in these three rivers, fell to the share of Pakistan. The treaty provided no clause for the termination by either party. There is no provision also that this will come up for negotiation, for the fresh negotiation or modification after 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. Usually in the international or interstate water treaties or even a judicial decision, there is always a clause at the foot that this shall be renegotiated between the parties after 30 years, or it holds only good for 30 years. There is no such time limitation is there, but there is some kind of an indication that parties should undertake modification of the treaty or show cooperation in the future depending on the circumstances. That is there in clause 12 and clause 7. Accepting that little bit available, whatever, one state, either Pakistan or India, cannot strictly terminate the treaty, is the opinion, one way of interpreting the things. So in these circumstances, one has to interpret a treaty and see what India has got, whether it got a fair deal or not, way back in 1960. In my view, it did get a fair deal, and nothing more could have been expected in those days because there was no technology in those days for India to transfer water from the western rivers to eastern rivers and use it in Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, or whatever. Whatever India wanted, it got it. That is, three eastern rivers which satisfied the needs of India then, satisfied more than the needs, was available to India. Therefore, in that sense, if need is the basis for treaty, the treaty then satisfied the situation. But over the period of 60 to 70 years, the treaty started working little uh, uncomfortable for India because the needs of India increased in the eastern rivers. The climate change has brought about certain difficulties, and these difficulties are differential. That the Himalayas in the eastern rivers, the glacification has reduced. This the study says so. International Sun Bangalore. In case of the western rivers, which all go to Pakistan, the glacification is still where it was. Therefore, there is no reduction of flow, is what is this study says. Because of the reduction of flows in the eastern rivers, India is feeling the pinch of climate change, and the facts and figures generated by the Bakra Bass Management Board also show there is about 20% reduction or little more in the available water in these three rivers. As a result, there have been interstate disputes between Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan on sharing of the water. Therefore, there is also a push or a demand in India that why can't we negotiate with Pakistan and ask for transfer of some water to the eastern rivers. But also
Yeah,
must remember
yeah,
that even whatever is granted to us in the western rivers under the treaty, we are not able to use it, but it cannot because it cannot be used in the state of erstwhile Kashmir, now Kashmir and Ladakh, you can say. But it can be transferred to the eastern rivers and can be used is the proposition. And for that purpose, India issued a termination notice last year, not termination, seeking cooperation to modify the treaty, which Pakistan rejected. So we stand there at.
okay. It's a very detailed explanation, Mr. Katarki. But so when the government says that they are suspending this Indus Water Treaty, what exactly do they mean?
Yeah, as I said, there is no provision really for the termination of treaty, no provision for the suspension of treaty. Also, there is no provision for defining the period for which the treaty operates. But at the same time, there is no restriction on the parties that they shall not terminate the treaty. In the circumstances when there is no provision restricting the sovereign right of a state to terminate a treaty, in the international customary law, it is assumed that no state can be burdened forever. And if it wants to take the risk of international risk of terminating a treaty or denouncing it or suspending it, it is free to do it. Usually, this is done by applying the famous doctrine of rebus sic stantibus, that is, change circumstances. But this doctrine has been modified to large extent and can say codified under the Vienna Treaty of Law of Treaties, Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties. But that was entered into 1969 and enforced later. So whatever the codification or the minimization of the principle of rebus sic stantibus has taken place under the Vienna Convention doesn't apply to the Indus because Indus Treaty is pre 1969, and there is specific provision in the Vienna Convention that under Article 4 it doesn't apply to the previous ones. So it doesn't apply to India. Even if it applies also within the Vienna Convention, a ground for termination can be made in the changed circumstances. And to that extent, and suspending a treaty, India is arguably well within its right in doing it.
I see. So, there is also a general perception that after the suspension, water has stopped flowing into Pakistan. Can you just explain, I mean, what exactly the situation is as we speak today?
Well, that is the most important thing. A lot of people ask question, and I also said so. This treaty is not a treaty which really creates a right in that sense. The rights of the parties exist even without a treaty under the general principle of international law. More importantly, uh, the water flows by gravity. it follows law of physics. Unless you have a dam to hold water, which acts as a tap, termination of treaty or a declaration that I will not abide by the international law has no meaning, because if you can't stop water, the proof of pudding in eating, if you can't stop the water, then your declaration has only a paper value declaration. Now, coming to this Indus, in Western rivers, as I said, there is about 100 MAF of water available, which is a large quantity. It is something like, you can say, 7 to 8 times bigger than the entire water available in the Kaveri, just to give a quantification. And if you can't stop this, means if you don't have the dam to stop, then how are you going to punish or create a compulsion or coercion in Pakistan? At the moment, India has some small hydropower dams. Even for construction of these hydropower dams, there were a lot of litigation. Baglihar as well as Kishan Ganga, it went to neutral expert and to the arbitration. But the total storage created by India so far is only 0.94 MAF out of 100 MAF available. So take it that is less than 1%, it cannot really trouble Pakistan. And India was in fact given some 3.6 MAF for consumptive use in Kashmir without transferring it to this side of the basin, that is eastern side. India has not been able to use that water also. So the termination of treaty for Pakistan, it means nothing immediately. And today the finance minister has also spoken. It doesn't impact us. Okay. Secondly, even if you in future go and do something, which India should do according to me, negotiate it, divert some 5 or more MAF of water to the eastern rivers to help Indian needs. That will still not affect Pakistan, because out of 100 MAF we sent, apart from that, they have got another 35 MAF generated in their territory. The total available water, including what comes from Afghanistan, Kabul, is 135 MAF. And at present, Pakistan has not been using more than 100 MAF of water. In fact, my calculation shows if you look to their the cultivation areas, they claim that they have got about 45 million acres of land, and two-thirds of that comes by groundwater. Well, you don't require really even half of this. But anyway, there is official statement that they require about 100 MAF altogether. So that leaves about 30-35 MAF of water still going to sea at Karachi or the Delta portion in Pakistan. And if India were to hold about 5 or 10 MAF water, it's not going to really affect Pakistan in that sense. Maybe during summer, the areas just at the interstate international border may feel pinch of it if India really stops water during summer, which is again a matter of international law. You can't starve people to stop water deliberately like that. You'll have to honor the downstream states' rights with or without agreement. So even that is not possible in that sense. But physically, if you ask me, there can be some injury created in Pakistan in the summer, particularly in the early part of the Kharif season for about 15 days in June. Beyond this, I don't think there is any possibility of injury possible which can make Pakistan come around immediately.
So, is there any international body like the United Nations, as far as the international river water disputes are concerned, which has a say in these kind of issues? I mean, is there anyone outside the authority of India and Pakistan to intervene at any level?
International law is a soft law. There is no provision in international law for compulsory adjudication of any dispute. In any domestic law or a national law, if somebody feels aggrieved, if I feel aggrieved by my neighbor's action, I will sue him in the court for injunction, for enforcement of agreement, or for damages. But in international law or international arena or international order, there is no such provision for compulsory adjudication of disputes. So strictly rule of law is not a part of international law or due process.
Mhm.
The adjudication comes only if the states agree to submit to the adjudication. Therefore, International Court of Justice, which sits at Hague, gets jurisdiction only if the states agree to submit to its jurisdiction. Otherwise, not.
Mhm.
There is no compulsory jurisdiction. There is a provision which enables a state to declare in advance that I accept compulsory jurisdiction in respect of XYZ disputes. India has also recently declared it in 2019, but that declaration does not include Pakistan or gives a right to Pakistan to sue India in the International Court of Justice. They may go and file the case, but I'm sure it will be dismissed at the threshold.
Mhm.
The other alternative remedy is to go to the Security Council, which is a political body and where veto power also exists for 5 nations, agitate before them. If they feel there is a ground for Pakistan to feel aggrieved immediately, they might issue a direction to India calling upon it to maintain the flow or something. But chances of Pakistan getting any directions are less because at the moment there is no reduction of flow. It is also possible that if the Security Council feels that the question of law has to be decided, that whether India has a right to suspend the treaty, it may refer to the International Court of Justice for its advisory opinion. Again,
Okay.
okay, only this is what is possible. There is another remedy people are talking, that is arbitration, which is a part of the Indus Treaty. But this termination of treaty or keeping in abeyance will not fall within the scope of arbitrable dispute under the treaty. And that World Bank has to decide which is the facilitator of the arbitration proceedings. And at the moment, there is a opinion. I'm not sure whether it is a formal one that World Bank has nothing to do at this stage in this dispute between India and Pakistan.
So going forward, so where do you see this treaty heading? Does it require some kind of a cooperation between India and Pakistan for it to be modified, or you think both the countries, if they continue to remain hostile to each other, then what do you think will happen? How do you see it going forward?
See, the thing is like this. As I said, the law of physics governs the water. Water flows by gravity. As long as water keeps flowing by gravity to Pakistan, Pakistan is not technically bothered about the treaty. It is bothered about the treaty only when India starts constructing some dam, and that too huge dam. Not one, many dams may have to be constructed, even to cause some minor injury during the early part of June to affect the kharif crop or some kind of a drinking water. So that may not, until that happens, that there may not be a meaningful negotiation between the two countries. But if that happens, that India starts planning to construct some dams, huge dams, storing some 10, 20 MF of water, then the Pakistan may protest. The protest may lead to the negotiations, diplomatic understanding, debate in the Security Council. And finally, the solution is a diplomatic solution in international law. If diplomacy fails, a state can go for a war. That is the ultimate remedy in international law. Although UN Charter has limited the right to launch a war except in self-defense, but that is controversial to what extent it will preclude a sovereign state from vindicating its right by launching a war or declaring a war. But that's apart. But I see, in the interest of both India and Pakistan, ultimately water is for public, not for the governments. The two governments may have hostility, there may be bad blood. It happens. Since water is required for the farmers in Pakistan, people in Pakistan, and India also needs water to divert a quantity to the eastern rivers. if it wants a modification, then it is in the interest of both India and Pakistan to sit across the table. And as India has proposed already, it is not new, it is already proposed last year in October itself by sending a notice, discuss the points raised by India. And I'm sure that will not hurt Pakistan. Pakistan should not stand any ego that I want pound of flesh as it existed in 1960. That's not possible. They should agree for a modification that will not hurt them. A reasonable modification is welcome for Pakistan also. So if politically they want to settle, they can settle. There's not a problem. But it all depends upon whether you keep the water dispute as water dispute or mix it with the other issue. Already the letter of suspension has said not only modification because of non-cooperation in the past, also because you are exporting terrorism. So if it is linked to terrorism and terrorism is linked to the Kashmir, then it is a difficult question to be resolved. It gets into the complex issue.
So, before we conclude, just one basic vanilla question. So, as far as the western rivers are concerned, how much of it geographically flows in India before going to Pakistan?
Nothing flows outside Kashmir. It flows in India, in Kashmir.
Okay. Oh, I see.
The whole,
Let's
whole,
go.
whole problem is it flows from India down to Pakistan, but through Kashmir, not outside Kashmir.
Thank you, and thank you for talking to the Federal. It's extremely illustrative, and I hope it clarifies a lot of issues because these issues are really so crucial for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.